Hello, everybody. You're listening to Fireside Paranormal Podcast. My name is Jordan Cline, and as always, I have a fun show planned out. The guest today is Ryan Stacy. He is the founder of the Experiencer Support Association. He's also the former National Chief Investigator for MUFON Canada. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. Before we get into that, I do want to mention spooky season doesn't last just a month. Shop Wicked Cat Clothing year-round to get your horror, paranormal, spooky, and Halloween apparel. Go to wickedcatclothing.com, shop apparel and accessories now, and save 30% with code Fireside30. Go check them out. Also, I'm a big supporter of American Paranormal Magazine. They have a thing going on. If you are a paranormal investigator and you want to get some recognition for your team, they're actually starting almost like a registry, like a database, as part of the magazine's website of different paranormal groups. So reach out to them and get your name on that list. There's also an event coming up later on this month. It is the Wonders Oddities Expo and the Tri-State Exotic Animal Expo. They're going to join forces for a huge 2-day event, March 26th and 27th at the West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville. Admission is $10. Kids 12 and under are free, and tickets are available at the door. I love these events. They're a lot of fun. I like having a table set out where I can meet you guys. I have a lot of folks that come up to the table and share their stories. That's where we get a lot of our featured stories. I love doing it. I love sitting face-to-face with you guys and hearing your stories and talking with you all about it. So as long as they keep doing events, I'm going to be a part of them. So I hope to see you guys there. Since this episode is more on the UFO side of the paranormal, a lot of people think paranormal and they only think, ghosts and spirits and things like that. So you throw in a little bit of the cryptids into the mix and your Bigfoots, your Wendigos, Mothman, and then just to top it off, we got to add those aliens, the extraterrestrials, the UFOs. Sometimes our brains don't connect them in the same realm, but really I think they're all connected to some degree. So I thought it would be fitting. We did get a featured story that was tied to something in the sky. So we're going to share that now. That is coming from Neil.
So, my name's Neil. I'm from Pittsburgh. And, there's a couple different things I could talk about, but the big one was back in the early 90s. I'm going to say before 95. Thank you. So I'll try and keep it as quick as I can. We grew up across the street from a church. And the one night, my brother and I are like, hey, where's Mom at? So we're like, maybe she's outside. So we walk outside, and our mother is outside talking to the priest from across the street. And so we walk over. We're just kind of, hi, Father, how's it going? Just talking to the priest a little bit, chit-chatting, whatever. And as we're talking, I look up, and I see some lights coming across the sky. Now, we live about a 20-minute, half-hour drive from the Pittsburgh airport, so we're used to seeing lights in the sky at all times. So I'm watching this, and I'm kind of looking at it. I'm thinking to myself, that must be two airplanes at two different altitudes, because there's like a smaller triangle that's red lights, and there's a larger triangle of white lights. And when I say triangle, I mean it's three lights in a triangle. So there's like a smaller red one in the front and a larger white one right behind it. And I'm thinking to myself, it must be two different planes at two different altitudes. But I'm watching it, and they're not moving, like away from each other. So I'm kind of like, is that maybe? I thought to myself, and this is the only like logical thing I can think of, is that there is a refueling wing near the Pittsburgh airport. I'm thinking maybe it might have been a plane refueling, but the thing is, though, a refueling plane's pretty big, and the bigger lights were in the back, and that's usually where the refueling takes place. Is that you pull it behind the refueling plane, and I'm kind of watching. I'm like, what the hell is this? And it's right about over our heads at this point, and the priest says, hey, good night, I gotta go. I look down at the priest, shake his hand, and I'm like, hey guys, look at this. And we look up, and now, this is the part that's really weird. When I was first watching them, they were moving with like like I said, they're triangles of lights. So the point was forward. So it was triangles moving, one light in the front, two lights in the back. I say goodbye to the priest. Must have taken, what, not even 5 seconds. Look back up. The red triangle is now reversed with two lights in the front, one in the back. And the white triangle is now two white lights in a row behind the middle red light. So it went from, I'm just demonstrating with my hands, I guess, but it went from like this to this in the space of not even 5 seconds. And so my mother and my brother and I are watching this thing, made no noise. My brother thinks he saw like a dark outline around it, like a blimp shape maybe, but blimp could have been it too. But we've had the Goodyear blimp fly over a couple times. They're friggin' loud. So this thing made no noise. We basically just kept watching it until it disappeared over the horizon. And that's probably the weirdest thing I've seen.
Thank you so much, Neil, for sharing your story. If you would like your story to be one of our featured stories, make sure you email me at firesideparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, and we can get your story played on the show. Also, I would like to start adding some paranormal investigation groups. I've had a few people reach out and talk with them a little bit just on how they want to share and what they want to share and how much they can share with everything going on. I love the communication with you guys. And I would like to start adding that as a feature on the show as well. So make sure if you're a group and you want to, be highlighted on the show, just reach out and let me know, and we can work it out. Again, it's firesideparanormalpodcast@gmail.com. All right, I want to get to our guest tonight. Join me by the fire as we welcome Ryan Stacy. He is with the Experiencer Support Association. He's also the former National Chief Investigator for MUFON in Canada. Ryan, you with us?
Yes, I am.
Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. You are a busy guy.
I certainly am.
Now tell
Thank
me
you for having me.
Tell me about what you do. What is the day-to-day for you? Because you have your hands in so many different spots.
Yeah, my day-to-day, yes, actually quite interesting. So, well, I don't know where to start, but I mean, the day usually starts with my private investigating company. So it's what's called Blacklight Investigative and Surveillance Services. We also have a security division, which we provide uniform service.
Oh, wow.
So I'm usually working on logistics and all that to make sure that's running and training and whatnot. I might get a couple investigations of my own in the mix of that, process serving, litigation and all that. And then in between, I'm kind of dabbling over to my other company, which is Tessa International Media Incorporated, which is operates as the Experiencer Support Association. So the Experiencer Support Association is essentially an outlet in which we're able to distribute or produce content within the UFO and paranormal community. And my role within that, I play many roles within that association. So not only did I find it, and then and I own it and I operated it, but I'm also one of the main influencers within that organization. And as that influencer within the organization, I'm a private investigator, which I am by trade. And what I do is I investigate claims of unusual and strange activity, including paranormal, UFO, paracryptid, monsters, Bigfoot, everything.
So you cover everything.
Everything, because it either all exists or none of it exists. And essentially, I also take fraud reports and crime reports through the Experiencer Support Association for anyone who may be victim of, some charlatans or some, online bullying because people don't believe them and things like that. So I'm quite busy investigating things and trying to understand why people are the way that they are and what is actually going on, and trying to understand why things are the way that it is, so that way I can do the science of my own to figure out what and focus on an area that's being missed or not being touched on at all, such as the experiencers.
So when you say experiencers, these are the folks that are having some kind of, well, to sound cheesy, some kind of an experience. But I mean, you're talking like people that have just seen a UFO and they don't know what to do. Somebody who's got, something bumping around in their house. And how do they get a hold of you? They find you?
Yeah, so that's a
using
good
it
question.
today?
So like the experiencer, yeah, would be identified as anyone who has come in contact with some sort of unusual phenomenon. And we just call them experiencers because it's a nice positive word, and they did experience something. They're not a victim, they're not, witnesses or anything of those negative terms. And essentially, the best way to get a hold of us for an investigation is to go to our website, www.tesacan.org. So that's TESACAN.org, and just click submit a report. And then that'll bring you into the portal there that will ask you all the questions that we need to know in order to assist you in collecting the evidence, if any is available, or working with you to get some better evidence and then hopefully come to a conclusion together to figure out what may or may not have actually happened. And then we do that case by case. Phenomenon per phenomenon. And then at the end of the year, I put together several reports, particularly on the experiencer side. The one I'm working on right now is a almost 4-year study,
Oh, wow.
which is called the Ultra Spectrum Paranormal Report, which would consist of 4 years of reports that were submitted and weeded out to kind of condense into 30 plus unknowns, with the best possible evidence that we could collect, and at the same time measuring what these 30, not just these 30 experiences have in common, but these experiencers have in common, from a biological perspective. So that way we can understand, why they're able to make contact with anything, let alone, nothing for some cases. So we remove those archetypes, remove those labels, and we just focus on the fact that something was observed in another space and time or reality of some sort, and get as much data as we can to try to compare the people and the events. And then we're reclassifying them and we're relabeling them, hopefully in the future, to kind of flush out this mess that we have today with misinterpretation of data.
So when you say you like want to, recategorize them, like what categories are you thinking?
Well, so I have a classification system. It's called the Ultra Spectrum Classification System. It is an enhanced version of the Hynek and Valet classification system, which I used for many years working with MUFON. I've also spoken with Paul Hynek on several occasions about the idea, and he's encouraged me to do so, even though he knows it's going to be difficult to have that go viral, of course, when I'm competing against something that's well known. However, a good example for that that also incorporates John Keel's super spectrum
Okay.
concept and theories, which is why we called it ultra spectrum, as it like kind of like an enhancement to that. So taking homage to all three of those great people. So we call them close experiences, so that way it's not again removing the encounter, so it's not automatically considered negative, because we also take in positive cases as well, positive perceived cases, mind you.
Uh-huh.
And so the Valet and Hynek classification is still in one column, but then I think there's 5 other columns that were created outside of that, and it's based on an evidence scale for policing or investigations. So the best example I would say for a category, to use UFO as an example, we categorize that as the first grouping would be sensory display. And the reason why it's sensory display is because that is allowing, like with the old classification system that only accepted visual evidence, like you've seen a UFO, and you had some picture or a video of it, like it was kind of documented. But at least with the sensory display, it allows reports to come in and be grouped the same, as if you heard it or you felt it, and then you didn't see anything, or perhaps you saw it through meditation in your mind, or some sleep state or something like that. So there's a little bit of a different sense. So it kind of allows all the sensories to be triggered in that.
Okay.
Then that gets sent to the next category or grouping within that would be split between aerial activity and paranormal activity, which kind of allows, if we use UFO as an example, or that paranormal or that orb, for an example, some people would label that paranormal orb, or some might call that a UFO or UAP. It's a ball of energy in the sky. So we kind of silo with that, and then we look at characteristics. So for paranormal, we would look at, objects moves, the, energy senses and things like that. But if it's in the sky, then we consider that to be aerial activity. So the next grouping is aerial activity.
So let me interrupt you there, and let me
Yeah,
just
go
ask,
ahead.
just so I understand. So just
Yeah.
because it's extraterrestrial doesn't mean it's aerial. Let's say you see an alien on the
hmm
ground. It's
hmm
then classified paranormal.
Well, everything's paranormal,
Okay,
just
but you
simply
don't
not
classify it under
normal.
the
But yeah,
aerial.
so an entity on the ground, I'll explain that one differently because it's a different category.
Okay, okay.
So the with the orb instance, aerial activity, then so the characteristics of that particular one would appear to be a light, so some sort of energy inside the sky. So that we would split those categories up into light or machine based on the characteristics, and then from there we would end it. So for this example, an orb without any labels or stereotypes or uh, misgroupings would be a sensory display because the vision is one of the senses that was triggered. It's aerial activity because it's in the sky, and it fits the categories of light. And then we just leave it at that. That allows people in the UFO community to call it a UFO and a UAP between the difference, because I know there's many interpretations of what those two words mean, even though they've been defined
Uh-huh.
and described on how they should be used. Um, and there's also the paranormal community who also see orbs and considers these UFO and UAPs to be paranormal. So it allows everyone who thinks differently or is raised differently or interprets differently to come to a single conclusion and agree that this light source is in the sky and it's within this category. Now, with an entity, that would be beings observed. I don't have my list in front of me, but if it's ET, extraterrestrial, that's an archetype. So we would look in beings observed to kind of figure out, first of all, whether it was, um, I don't have my sheet in front of me because I don't get many of those. But we would split that up to see what type of entity was observed. So bipedal or quadruped, like depending on if maybe it's aerial,
Yeah.
aquatic. So we kind of look at little features in terms of the species. And then we can kind of interpret that from there to determine if it's a paracryptid, which might be like a monster type, which is essentially what an extraterrestrial could be. Um, and then from there we kind of remove those labels so that we were kind of looking at a being was observed in this instance. It fits these characteristics based on the testimony and drawings and evidence, and then therefore here's the category in which it sits in. And the reason for doing that without labeling them, you can see them and call them ET, ghost, whatever you want. I mean, it really doesn't matter. But in terms of measuring and trying to understand what it is, we can't label it until we're able to diagnose it.
Yeah.
And so what we're hoping to do is get a large enough sample of this data with all these labels and archetypes removed, and then kind of split them up and put them in these popular categories, maybe throw them in that UFO bucket again as an example, or ET bucket as an example, and try to figure out if they still fit in those categories. If not, then recreate and create a new grouping, because a lot of people, as an example, with apparitions, let's say ghosts, and apparitions often get confused as well, but that's transmedium. Like that could be
Uh-huh.
extraterrestrial, not ghost, but I mean it could be some sort of being using technology, and we're seeing it in within the ultra spectrum, so the ether.
Or
Um,
dimensional.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of misinterpretation of what is actually going on, a lot of missing information. But the experiencers who report from all over the world, with many different beliefs, with many different understandings, and with many different interpretations. So what this system allows us to do is to take the case in, without correcting them, without judgment, and allows us to repackage it. And when we give it back to the experiencer, it's categorized in this way, so it's easier to understand that we may not be able to tell you what this is, but at least we found a category in which it fits, and here's a bunch of people who are in your category that have seen something similar, let's, I want to connect you with these people, and be interesting to see what information comes out from you guys having some conversation about your experiences, and see what you have in common or what you don't have in common, so we can kind of figure out what this is. And then once we have more data like that, then we can go into a further step by trying to, go into the field in some hotspots that we've collected to try and manipulate or capture, data in real time.
Now, how often do these reports come into you? I mean, is this like an all day, every day, phones ringing off the hook, or is it once a
Um,
month? What how often do they come in?
I usually average a couple a week. But not everyone that comes in gets submitted to the entry, mainly because of the process with getting a process. So we kind of have to ask some questions with the experiencer to make sure that they want it to be investigated. So
Gotcha.
some people just like to submit just for general purpose, and then there might not be any information to do. Some people need treatment, like are looking, they exhibit anxiety or PTSD or some sort of stress ailments, and really they don't care for an investigation at this moment, but what they really are looking for is some help, some support. So we would make those referrals first, and then later on bring in another report later on. So I mean, I don't know the number for the fourth year, but out of the first 3 years, I only have 137.
Okay.
But that I think I have, I don't know, over those are just the ones that are remaining with the best data, right? So if you don't give me any information that I can use to trace, and it's really hard to investigate.
Yeah.
So just because it's a low number, it's less is more. It's quality over quantity. And none of them get rejected. All the experiencers do get support and they do get help, but they don't always get entered into these reports. And it's just the ones that meet the criteria, and the criteria that we're looking for is simply the best evidence. So if they don't have evidence, it's not a problem. But what we do is we encourage them and teach them how to obtain the evidence, and we hope that they report again with evidence, so that way we can actually do the work we need to do. But it's still hearsay evidence, and circumstantial evidence is still part of the data set,
Yeah.
because it gets compared and contrasted with these unknown samples that we have too. So it's all important. So the reason why I kind of went the long way of explaining that is, in my career, I've covered over 1,200, perhaps close to 1,300 cases. That would include MUFON, the ones I've done with MUFON. And a lot of those cases had a lot of bad information, and it was a lot of fluff, and it was really the way the reporting system was designed, it didn't really allow room for good investigation. So my reporting system that I created for the Experiencer Support Association uses smart logic. So it's only going to ask you questions that are relevant to the questions that you to the answers you provide. And the interesting thing too is by the time you get to the end of the questionnaire, if you've answered it truthfully, you may have solved it for yourself and may choose not to submit.
Ooh.
And I know that I have data that shows me that the amount of people that go to the reporting system, there is, out of that 137, I think for the last 2 years, has been 2,000 of people choosing not to submit. So I don't know I know there's no errors with the system, but I do know, and they do give us opportunity to provide some feedback to say, hey, I don't need this anymore, or I figured it out, or they might have changed their opinion by the time they get to the end of it. So it's available as a resource to help get it off their chest. But then if they don't click submit, we still help them, because they were able to work through that mentally, and then they somehow got to a point and they read it out loud, and maybe they decided they weren't comfortable for sharing it, or it sounded a little bit sideways, and once they read it out loud before they hit the submit button, they came to a realization that maybe it was just a speck of dust or something like that. So it kind of helps me get the best data, so that way every case that I'm working on has everything I need, so I can do good work every time.
So when you're looking at these, it's singled out so many that, what you say, 137 roughly?
Well, that's how many I have entered in for years 2019, 20, and 21, I believe.
So you're looking at
Or
this.
18, 19, and 20, pardon me.
Okay, you're fine. So you're looking at this information. What um, similarities are you finding? Are you finding there's more, you know, alien stuff? Are you finding more of the ghost reports? Are you getting any kind of similarities with those folks? Or are they all kind of completely individualized?
Well, it's interesting we look at those two and the data. I still have the raw data, so I haven't really done any. I haven't done my report yet on my interpretation of what the data shows, but I am seeing a lot of people describe what appears to be shadow figures or ghost or apparitions. But when
Okay.
we get to the evidence part, if they don't have a picture, or I think we usually do a drawing program or something like that. And if they do end up drawing it 9 times out of 10, it looks like an extraterrestrial. So we have a lot of this. Which is another
Very
reason why
interesting.
we're removing these labels, because visually people are seeing things that don't look like the definition, but they're calling it something else. So when we're talking about it visually in their mind, it appears to be something else. So that's why it's important to go through this process, draw, and then regroup them, and then reanalyze them, and then whoever wants to slap a label on it, they can. So paranormal versus UFO, it's kind of all over the place, because especially when you throw consciousness in the mix, because we also have people reporting precognition, alleged psychic abilities or psychic contact, meditation and visions, CE5 and contact. So these are all methods used to connect with the ultra spectrums, with the ether, or the inner space, or whatever that you want to call that other, that void or that place where everything exists and we can't see. So even in the paranormal community, we have the consciousness people making contact or doing some sort of psychogenic event that allows them to see things that are described as the typical definition of a ghost, apparition, or extraterrestrial. So there's everything in there.
Uh-huh.
So what I'm finding when I'm measuring, which is why I'm focusing on the people, is trying to understand what methods are being used to make contact into these places, or to see or experience, before I try to interpret what they're experiencing, because I want to be able to establish how they're able to get to that place, so I know what that place may or may not be. And then from there, we can kind of understand why they think they see what it is that they see. And then that can be divided into many other things. So it's a complicated study. Let's just say that.
I'd say you got a lot going on with that. Now, do
Yeah.
you individually meet with these folks as well and talk to them? Because if they're putting through this report, obviously they are feeling they've seen something, at least to some degree. Now, do you take like the paranormal investigator approach to go into their home, try to find out what's going on, or are you more like, data collection, making the report, trying to figure out that way what's happening?
The short story is I can do all of those things. It's just in stages. When you get one case, there's usually not enough data to support or justify the means to spend any amount of resources to travel to any place to collect data at a location that the event may have happened many, many years ago. There's not a lot of evidence left over to collect. So my process has always been working with the experiencer in the location in which they are. So as a trained investigator, licensed investigator who owns a company, like recreating events is kind of my forte.
Yeah.
And I have to be smart enough to understand what evidence is available and how that evidence would be obtained. So if safe to do so, it's and by involving the experiencer could obtain the evidence for me without having to go there. So for an example, I get a photograph of what appears to be an orb in the sky or a light, a UFO of what they're telling me that. I need to see that area during the day. So I would give instructions to the experiencer to go to the exact same place and take me some photographs during the day. And then I'm looking at these photos and I see something else that I'm interested in. I ask them to go and do that and blah, blah, blah to get me the evidence. So they're involved. And they start to learn the process as well through me. And if we end up coming to a conclusion where it can be identified, that's another reason too why there's only 137 because there's a lot of cases I was able to identify. Um, and so it'd just be easier for them to accept when it comes to the conclusion part if they're involved with the process. Now, once we do that, and that's why it's important to do, so that's the preliminary case, but then that's where I do all these times with all these cases, so I get the data and the science, and then the science will then show me hotspots and trends and similarities to determine where I would go and who I would and what I would be measuring when I go into the field. So then I go into the field at these calculated areas, from the hypothesis that's drawn from the data. And then I would then do some experiments in the field or in those locations, general areas then. And then from there, compare that to everything else and then kind of wrap everything up. So every element that you see is needed. But if you don't need to go into the field every time there's allegedly something that's going on in the sky. So to compare this to like the surveillance analogy, essentially, like if someone were to hire me and say I need you to go outside this address and observe and report, I would never just get in a vehicle and go and wait outside. What I would need to do before that is I would need to do some surface research, some investigations around the area, and I would need to plan my investigation before I go there. I need to figure out if I can park in a legal spot, if I got the vantage point, if I can do that, if I can obtain the evidence, I need to figure out who the neighbors are, because maybe they won't call, but the neighbors might. So I need to do a lot of prep work before I go into the field. So that way, when I spend the resources and the client, usually surveillance is the heaviest of all the bills, because that takes the most time. I want to, increase the risk of getting the evidence that they need for their case by having a prepped investigation before we go. So that's why this process is long. That's why it's 4 years in the making to put the data report out so people can actually see what it is that I'm talking about, because I spent a lot of time talking about this, but no one's ever seen it. So I need to kind of show my work a bit here. But then from that, that's gonna kind of give me the idea of where I need to focus, where I can tour, where I can travel, where I can go to meet these people.
Now the cases that you have, the 137 over the last few years, are those ones that you have went to investigate so far?
Virtually, like I have not physically gone to these
Okay.
places yet. So the places that I would go would be the top 30 that have not been identified, because they also get a disposition. So they'll either be identified, or it might be inconclusive or insufficient evidence out of these 137. So what I'm saying is, out of all those cases, only 30 of them have enough evidence that I'm willing to travel to and take a look, or at least meet the experiencers in person to kind of take on that further study.
Gotcha.
So, and that's kind of weeding through the process, because like when you look at a crime scene, like a murder crime scene, like as the best example, there's lots of pieces of evidence in that room. But which, how do you determine who the witnesses are that you need to talk to first? So you got to get all, collect all the evidence, look at everything too, and then you kind of you need to select your best witnesses to interrogate when you start that investigation. That's very important, because as soon as you start your investigative process, everyone else who's involved in those circles will be tipped off, and then that the first 48 is a legitimate thing. Like that's usually how long it takes for people to get out of there. so this approach is similar in the sense that I'm now convinced that through this method, through the science that the system I've created, through the science that I've overlooked, and the data shows me the highest probability of there being success, that makes it easier for me to fund myself to go and do a further study. Now, that's for me trying to understand what is happening and what may not be happening. But in between all that, the experiencers still get to partake in social groups and
Okay.
virtual social groups. We do, once the pandemic is over, we will be housing some meetups, and there will be opportunity for them to report to me personally, and then we can kind of do that back to back right away.
How big of an
Um,
area? Like, are these folks from like all over the world? Are they, limited because you're in Canada? Are they limited to like, your area in
ma-
Canada?
well, yeah, majority of the sample for the first 2 years is Canada because I'm Canadian, and that's where I've been marketing. But the next 2 years, I'm in marketing, and my influence has spread to America, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand. So the area in which these samples are coming from is based on whoever makes a report from whatever area they are, wherever they're listening. So I can assist. The process is the same no matter where you are. Now, to get me to go to here's the other thing too, with what we understand with the phenomenon and with remote viewing and consciousness and meditation and all these other tools that are available to make contact. I don't necessarily need to go to a physical location in order to make contact. I'm trying to get to that place to see this, and travel, astral travel, if you will, specifically from any place in time, because that's how we're all connected, just like we're connected right now, electronically and through the internet and things like that. It's kind of that same approach. The only time I would physically need to go to a physical location, if there was a cluster of events in one spot that there may be room to test, but I mean 9 times out of 10 that is a Hollywood a hot spot or a famous hot spot that everyone's been to, so you can get some data online. But I mean, whether or not that data is credible, that's kind of
Yeah,
debatable as
absolutely.
well. So I would go there to get my own data if it was justified. But what is it that I'm measuring? I'm measuring the same thing. So if I have somebody beside me that has a paranormal experience and saw a ghost, and that data compares to people all over the place in the world that I've had in my sample, I can work with my neighbor and get the same results, and I don't need to travel. Um, the need to travel is only is a misconception. Like I can, if I were to compare that to in the investigative world again, for missing persons, sitting here in my chair where I am in a small town in Ontario, I was able to locate someone who lived in Florida who skipped out on $10,000
Oh,
for alimony just without even leaving this chair. I didn't have to go to, there's a lot of tools and resources available now. Of course, back in the old days, the PIs had to get money and travel and go and knock on doors and do those things, but it's not needed anymore.
everything's
The
virtual now.
Everyone's virtual because everyone's put everything online, and there's ways to trace it, and there's a history, and there's a database, there's the dark web. Like there's so many areas to get information
Bro, you're on
quickly.
Facebook. We know where you're at.
Yeah, so a lot of people forget that. Now they do try these things where they try to hide things, or they use pseudonyms and fake names in the UFO community. That was a fun and easy one. Everyone uses fake names, and it just takes me like 5 minutes, and I got your real name, and then it's like, I understand why you got a fake name, and then the decision is whether or not I'll just put that in a box for later in case you're hating on me. But yeah, I mean, it's brutal out there.
Hey,
But I
I want
mean,
to sideline real quick
yeah, go ahead.
because I picked up on something you said there, and I just wanted to touch back on it. You
Yeah.
were talking about remote viewing and astral
hmm
travel. Is that something that you are able to do?
I am unsure if I am able to do. However, I am interested in the remote viewing
Okay.
phenomenon. Simply having a bit of a military background, a little bit of an understanding of that being a human element kind of contact. So that's kind of like a bridge into the psychogenic or the consciousness. Personally, I have had what would be categorized as a psychogenic event, so download or noetic event. I don't know how you would group it, but a download is kind of the best way to do that. Basically an information package that resulted in an image that had intricate shapes and symbols and colors on it. And that was during my transition from leaving MUFON and then not knowing what to do next, and then creating the Experiencer Support Association as a result of reflecting on this, what I call the map or the power symbol, because it had the word TESA around it. Mm-hmm. So the Experiencer Support was something I was running with for a while, but then the Experiencer Support Association kind of came out of that. Now, long story short, with that, this is at the very beginning, back in 2018, when that happened, I just chalked that off as a creative moment where I just decided to be. I had this spurts of artistic, energy, and I created the intricate power symbol out of all these things I may have seen before in my life. But some of these, and even though they all made sense to me, and I could understand what all these symbols meant on top of it, when I look at them individually, I started to realize that there was a pattern in certain things when they were associated. So such as like time and eras and religions, like everything was kind of there. And then as I decided to make that more public in the sense of like, hey, I don't know what this is. Has anyone seen this before? That spiraled into a whole rabbit hole of other people who have seen the symbol or something similar, and then interpreting the associating of that. So there's been this kind of this association has been kind of built and created by people being drawn to this symbol.
Wow.
Which you can see on the website www.tesacan.org. The website is being redone, it's being rebuilt. So pardon me for it being ugly. It's just been sitting there for a couple months because a new one's being made. Because the data that I have in it, I ran out of space, so I need a bigger database because I have more research to put in. So I've been meeting with some people who take different perspectives and different careers and different life paths, and all interpreting on this one symbol. So as an investigator, I know that the event that happened when this vision or this message or whatever, or this dream, because it was a dream state, had occurred. I know that I drew the symbol. I don't recall starting and finishing or everything. I just recall starting it, but I don't recall everything in between. We started and finished it, and then I kind of left it at that for a couple months or so. But then I'm finding people that are associating these with the zodiac and astrology, and some flat Earth stuff kind of come up with it, and some mythology. There's Masonry, there's Eastern Star, there's Templars. There's so many different things that are connected with it. But the other thing too is when I started working with it in a dimensional aspect, so the image is flat and compressed in 2D. But when I apply since I see symbols of Masonry, and I see a symbol for Sumerian, so that kind of gives me a base 60, which gives me kind of instructions on rules. And when I apply mathematics to it and use a simple ratio, when I see the object in three-dimensional, it appears to either depending on the orientation, it appears to be what looks like a flying saucer above a black pyramid. It also, depending on the layers, it also looks like the possibility of having looks like a potential Stargate and portal. It also has indications of there being 10 layers instead of the 4, depending on how you look at it. But anyways, there's many ways to interpret this symbol.
And I'm looking at it right now as well.
Are you looking at it right now? So there's many ways that you can interpret it. But the thing is, this symbol didn't come with an instruction manual. So everything that has kind of unraveled after, and the information I'm sharing you with today, is 2 years of me trying to interpret why that event happened to me. Because if I'm an experiencer, or if that was my experience, remote viewing is human oriented. Perhaps it could be, Angel Radio was playing and I intercepted, who knows,
Here's
that could have
a
been,
thought, and I just wanted to run it by you and see in your
yeah.
experience. I've heard a lot of remote viewing cases with contactees.
Yeah,
Is
like I
that
mean,
something you've ever
I've heard that
experienced,
as
or?
well, and I mean, I don't have any evidence to say directly that I've spoken or received a message from any true source or one source. All I know is that I saw this image flash in front of me, almost like a movie picture, and I obsessed about it until I was able to create the image on a computer several days later. And it wasn't until I've done that that I was able to relax.
Wow.
So something was intercepted, something was stuck, and I had to release it. Um, and then I haven't got any messages or whatever you want to call it since, and I never really asked either. So I've been kind of afraid in a sense, being the scientific study that I'm doing. But at the same time, because I'm measuring the people, I'm also looking for characteristics that are similar to my biological makeup. So I'm actually in the sample as well. Nobody knows what part of the sample I'm in, but because I have experiencer ID numbers, so that we were all anonymous, of course.
Yeah.
But I am starting to see other people experiencing similar phenomenon and similar things, and so that's kind of helping me believe that there is something extraordinary happening, but I'm not entirely sure if it's paranormal or UFO involved. And I have this heavy feeling, confident feeling, that human beings are just evolving, and what that's what we're experiencing right now is many years after either contact back then or these with my labs and MK Ultra, all these experiments from many years ago, we're now evolving into this consciousness stage, and I don't think that the extraterrestrials or the ghosts perhaps are like in this physical world. They may be in the ultra spectrum, which is why I'm focusing on learning how to make contact, or get to those places, because as an investigator, I need to get to that place so that way I can understand what is actually going on. So I have enough data to support that there may be a place, and once, as I start to tour and take this information with me, I will slowly start to subject myself to, regression or remote viewing. And I will document my own experiences to that and how that relates to the stuff that I've already collected. So that way the sample doesn't remain spoiled. Because a lot of, sorry, excuse me. So and the reason I'm doing that is because as soon as I unlock my mind to find out what may or may not have happened, that would change my perspective. It would change my faith. It would change my belief.
And who knows
But
what might come through.
who knows when that come through? There will be a point in time for that. So what I'm trying to do is build my case so that way when it happens, those who followed me all this way through and I say, oh my God, I saw what you saw, they know I'm not making that up for ratings or something silly. Because there's a lot of people in this industry that just claim to have a sighting because it's cool and it's clickbait, and that's their story, and they run with it forever. Actual experiences versus and genuine experiences versus Hollywood, and a lot. And I'll keep in mind with you these 30 people that have made it to the final, and 30 plus, because I haven't added 2021 yet, that has made it to the finals in this sample. They all want to be anonymous, so they haven't posted on the internet. They haven't gone and done radio shows. They haven't gone to the press. I do shows like this to on their behalf,
Can you
to let them
share any
know.
of those stories with us,
I can.
or some like
I
highlights of it?
think in the top of my head, because I don't have anything in front of me. But you're on the website, so there are some witness reports there that you could look at as a indicator. We do. I will tell you this, the 30 that I've just been spoken about, I've created recreation events. They're little 30 second to a minute clips that kind of show a drawing in color in 3D, and walks through the experiencer event. It's called Tessa's Most Wanted. We're working once I'm done 2021 and add that to the data. I'll be able to do the 2021 cases and add to that. But what we're going to do is release those little recreation events, which is kind of designed for for everyone who's experiencing to see, like, hey, I live there, or hey, I've seen that too, and then that way they can report, because I need to have more people.
It's kind of like, and I
Excuse
do
me.
want to ask this because I've heard several people so far. You said that you see a lot of people that have seen like the Shadow Man.
Yeah.
Um, have any of them been wearing hats? Because
Uh,
I've heard a
yeah,
lot of reports
there's
of that.
been a couple that have drawn and identified people, men wearing hats. Yeah. It's strange. Is it a hat, or is it a helmet? Is it horn? Like, I
Does it
mean, these
just
are
look like that?
silhouettes,
Yeah.
right? Um, the Men in Black persona that comes out of that. I mean, you think after many years of fads coming in and out that they would forget about the hat, but it seems to be iconic. And then I always wonder, are these people approaching from the same space and time? Maybe they're from the past coming to the future, or if it's a silhouette, maybe it's not a hat at all. It's some sort of a shape of something else, because we don't really have a lot of features that come out from these, because usually they're in dream states, or they're I wouldn't say there's some sort of cognitive effect that's making it difficult for them to see normal or experience under normal circumstances. You know, so it's really strange, and but I mean, again, bipedal. It's got two legs, arms, and it does look humanoid. Many do report a tie and a suit, so it does look civilized. Um, that's human. It's not, or it's a hybrid, or it's
Yeah.
it's it's
Yeah.
like, it could be. There's many interpretations. For me, I look at the experiencer, and I start to measure how they were able to make that connection. So if they were dreaming or they were meditating, and they saw a portal in their closet, and an entity had appeared. That's why we go back to those groups, because that's be an entity, and that would be or being observed, and that would be a humanoid. Bipedal will be the category for that, because it's presumed to be humanoid based on the characteristics, but we don't know for sure. So, that's when we kind of go back and look at the methods that they use to make this contact, or that were present, because we also measure whether it was invited or uninvited. Because invited contact would be those meditations and those astral travels and those CE5s and things like that. But uninvited is usually during sleep state, dreams and nightmares and things like that. But we don't even know, if that's the real reality when we go to sleep. There's a lot of other scenarios that we haven't really locked down in yet. But what's the constant in that sense is that while these experiencers are in some sort of meditative or sedative state, is when they start to see these things.
Now you were
So
with MUFON for several years, right? You said it was thousands of cases that you had done with them.
yeah, I had done, and the most cases that anyone has ever done in MUFON history in in the entire existence that they've ever
Wow.
been a company.
In that time, was there any like interference, like any kind of government, did any case have somebody come up to you and be like, "Hey, don't look into this"?
No, I mean, that's another phenomenon too. Like, I mean, I'm pretty open with what I do. I'm
Uh-huh.
very brave, especially on Twitter. And I say this every time. There's a disclaimer: Twitter is designed for work. So if you communicate with me on Twitter, and you're part of an ongoing investigation. So just FYI, I seem to have to remind everybody that. The I am very forthcoming with when I have information. I am very thorough in my investigation. So, what I do when I'm accessing declassified information from the Canadian government, I am asking for additional information. I am questioning why I don't get certain things. I am working with them. I am posting this information whenever I get it. I'm writing books about it. I'm traveling. I'm doing whatever I need to do with it. So the Canadian government is well aware that I am providing this information or doing stuff with this information. So if that could just very well be a different understanding or appreciation for the phenomenon,
Yeah.
and they don't have a Men in Black unit, or I haven't really done anything that's kind of, arrogant or worthy of getting, killed of some sort
Oh
or
God.
silenced. But like, I mean, and why I say that is and I'm looking. I can't see me, but I got my hand in my face in my hands here because I'm stressed about this. But like a lot of people's tactics towards disclosure, um, you know, that's the reason why they don't have any answers. You get more bees with with honey, or more bears with honey than you do, or whatever that saying is.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Honey, you want to kiss their ass anyways. So you get more out of that, and they know that I'm a private investigator. They know that I'm not media. So what does that mean? When I'm not media, I'm not about to write a report that's going to hang them later on in the end. I'm not going to catch them in a trap in
There's
which
no
they're going
biases.
to.
You're not trying to get them.
No, I'm just simply like, hey, I got this. I'm trying to understand what this means. Can you help me understand this? This is my interpretation of it. What does this actually mean? Oh, and they're so helpful. Canadian government is very helpful when you approach them and you ask them these questions, especially if you don't ask for it. The trick, though, is that you have to know that something exists in order to get to request access to it. And when you have evidence that
Ah.
something exists, then you can request for it, and then they can search. If they come back and say no record found and you still have evidence that it exists, then you can challenge that, and you challenge that, and then they look again, and then all of a sudden they found it. But I mean, like, so there is a process and there is a way to get this information, and they are releasing information to me when I request it. The Canadian Space Agency has often referred civilian cases to my organization directly.
Wow. Wow.
And that's simply because they don't investigate. They don't take an interest in that, according to what they say publicly. Whether they do that secretly or not, who knows? But I mean, there's no sense in digging towards that, because they don't need to confess to that, and if they will, if they, that'll be at the appropriate time. And plus, there's a lot of other things going on in the world today, let alone that. So my perspective by working with the Canadian government is they're very open, and they've declassified thousands and thousands of documents back in 1995, which are available online for those who want to make requests and things like that and understand how to do that. And I've requested all of them. I have majority of them. And there are some, and even when you read these files, there's more. They speak of other files in which you can get access to. They can dig and archive. So they have a lot of information available to the public if someone were to ask for it. But you can't just send a message to the government and say, I want everything you have. They're just they don't have time.
Yeah.
You understand the business too. So if you can narrow it down and say, on this date at this time within this range, can you do a search for me? Then they do a search, and something comes up that lets you know that they found it. But then they have to do a third party check, because it has personal information. So they have to contact the third party that's involved to get their permission before they release it. Now, that doesn't mean I won't get the document. It just means they get to choose. That's how the redaction process happens. So whenever they can release the document in full, but if there's a third party that's involved, they get a say in whether or not they want their personal information released. So if they say, I don't want my personal information released, then it gets redacted. And then when these journalists get these documents and things like that, and they post them and blog them, and they have a field day with them, clickbait, and there's that assumption that the secrets are redacted. It's possible, but I mean, there's a lot of information that isn't redacted. And a lot of times, if you ask for like a flight log, for an example, that's an entire day. You got to expect that to have some redactions, because if
That's a lot of
an
people.
aircraft had responded to an event at a certain time, then that won't be redacted because that's what you've asked for. But everything else in between, if they went off to like Iraq after that, or or went to buy some groceries after that, that's in the report afterwards. But I don't need to see that because I didn't ask for it.
Mhm.
So and you can't ask for no redaction. So like there's many rules in the game, and so if with me, I spent many years in the access to information request for many reasons, not just ufology. To help with clients and cases and lawsuits and things like that, to collect evidence. I do understand the wording. I do understand how to get them to give me the information if it's available, and I have to just make their job easier for them, because these clerks, these analysts at the very beginning, they're like, okay, they're tasked with taking this and looking to see what's there. So internally, the question or not is whether or not it's been reported, or it exists, or it's been there for this analyst to hand over to me. So there has been, at the very beginning when I started getting into this, a series of the mail coming to me, opened and then resealed. I've had my name circled. I've had, marks indicated on the mail, and I've had many conversations with my post office as to why my mail's being opened and things by the Canadian government. But and it's the very reason why people get these conspiracies. But that was at the very beginning, and then I end up learning that like the analyst sends it. Like, so when I interview or question the analyst as to like, why is my mail being tampered, and she had no idea. And she said, all I can say to you is that when I'm done here, I send the mail up before it goes down. And then I was like, well, what do you mean by sending it up and down? What's up and down? She says, well, I send it up for departmental review, and before it goes down to the floor in the bottom, which is the mail room, for distribution. So the analyst who I'm communicating with is doing the job the best that they can, putting the information in an envelope, and then it goes to a different level that gets opened, and then are they checking to see what the information is before it goes out, or are they putting something else in? I don't know. And then sealing it back up, and then it gets mailed. So that's the explanation for why that's being checked. And when I first looked into that at the very beginning, I thought, well, this is no wonder it's coming back. No record found. This is made up. This is made up. This is made up. But then I got one. I got my first one in 2018, which was a declassified service document,
Ooh.
which is communications for vital intelligence, or communication report and vital intelligence screen. I can't remember. I can never remember that acronym. But anyways, which is a declassified document of a UFO that was reported by a pilot that was oscillating vertically, red and green lights, and vertically, not horizontally, vertically. And it was at a high altitude, at a high rate of speed, not on radar, all that fun jazz. And they considered it no threat. And I held onto that document for a couple years, because I was thinking, oh, geez, now they're testing me. I've been asking. They know that I'm like, I'm trying. So maybe they just, let one slip, or they're like, let's see what this guy does with it. Right. So, and I think because of the way that I handled it is the reason why all of a sudden I'm getting more and more every time I ask for it. Or maybe I just wasn't asking the right questions, and then I finally figured it out and asked the right questions.
Wow.
And what's interesting about that document, though, is I shared that with Paul Hellyer in 2019, I believe. And the first thing he did, so Paul Hellyer is the ex-minister of defense,
Uh-huh.
as well.
I had him on my show before.
Okay, perfect. You know who he is. Great. So he takes one look at me. He has no idea who I am from Adam, and he just looks at me. I don't know how old he was then, probably 90 at that point. And he's like, who are you, and why do you have this? And I was like, my name is Ryan Stacy, and I was hoping you would be able to explain that to me, because I've been holding on to this. So, he had looked through it, and he explained to me the interesting thing about the document is, by it saying no threat, indicated, in his opinion, that the Canadian government had to know what it is. because if they don't know what it is, then it would have to be considered, a national security threat. And so then you go back to the description of it. It's an oscillating vertically, red and green lights at a high altitude and a range of speed and no radar. It didn't appear on radar, and it was moving fast, chasing this aircraft. So like, but yet no threat. So that sounds threatening. It sounds bizarre, but confirmation that the government was able to identify it enough to a point to consider it not a threat. Some people could speculate on that and say, maybe they didn't have enough information to consider it a threat. It was gone, blah, 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 things like that. But I also shared it with Richard Dolan because he was at the same expo. We had some many conversations about that. This is the Expo, Alien Cosmic Expo in Canada, one that I ran for the last 4 years or so, which is now going to be repurposed into a new name called Interconnected UFO and Paranormal Retreat, which is for experiencers.
So
I spent all this time talking about this document and getting through all these other things. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I had Paul Hellyer on, and this was a show before this one. The Fireside is a newer program. I used to host a show called Whispers Radio, so this was over 10 years ago. So I had him on the show, and he was talking. He was getting into like inflation of currency and things like that. Political stuff, and just out of nowhere, he's like, "Well, everybody knows the U.S. is working with aliens. The Air Force out in the desert is running tactical missions with the mothership, and every country knows it but your own. Anyway, the inflation." And I was like, "Wait, hold on, what?"
Yeah. I gotcha. What's interesting about Hellyer is I have, because I have a connection with the Canadian Space Agency, I do have communication records with the Canadian Space Agency and Paul Hellyer in my person as well that I will be releasing on our website once it's been developed. And he does talk about some very interesting things. I'd have to go back to my notes to see specifically. There's a lot of things going on, and what I was trying to say with this document, chase with this document, because this is my first one. I spent a couple of years going around showing all these people this document, and I was so excited about it because I finally got one. What does it mean, and what do I do with it? And so then I finally write this report and I publish it, and then nothing happens. Nobody does anything with it. Journalists don't write about it. Nobody cares about it. It was just kind of deflating. And then I continue working on these cases, I continue doing more, building my audience, building my network, is doing it for these groups of people. That's kind of like how I got to, I guess, how you heard of me as well, like kind of working on this reputation. And then all of a sudden, a journalist comes by and writes this breaking story about a UFO classified document that the government has had, and it's my document 2 years ago, 2 years later. and so he ended up getting that allegedly, from what's been reported to me, it was passed off to him that somebody that knew it was my document. So there was a bit of because I'm a private investigator and I do pop a lot of bubbles. It was at a time in my career, which is still happening right now, where individuals are trying to make sure that my name isn't higher than theirs. So there was a bit of a strategical play where this article was written about this document. But the thing is I'm not important. I may have been the guy who retrieved the document. I tried to make it public and I tried to make it famous so that way people would talk about it. And with this journalist becoming famous because he's the one who repurposed my document, which is another issue on its own, it really doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that the Canadian government is declassifying these documents that they exist. So it really started the conversation in Canada. Fast forward to today, I mean, me and that journalist are still trading back and forth with trying to get documents out in the public because, it appears that he's, going for likes, and whereas I'm trying to take the data and make sense of it. So what I kind of want to segue into that, and I mean, like, he writes good stories, he does really well in that, and it's purposeful, and there's a meaning, and there's a lot of following that enjoys that style.
Yeah.
But from an investigator perspective, writing a story about these documents or writing a book about these documents is a waste of time. And I always compare this to Greenwald, John Greenwald in the United States. He puts a lot of effort into getting these reports. He's doing the same thing. He's been doing it longer, of course. He's reading these, he's asking these questions, he's getting these information, he's posting, he's starting the conversation, he's getting everyone talking about it, and he's got this hype going, which is great, and it's really good. But as a new investigator coming to the table, trying to get all caught up on this, looking at his website, it's very hard to navigate. It's very hard to find what I'm looking for. It's very hard to trace these leads. So this is where the investigative skill kind of comes in. And with our website, which is being rebuilt, so the database is kind of being structured differently. So that way, when we upload our cases and our declassified documents, you're going to be able to see where you're going to be able to search the material, because every document will be transcribed. There will also be a digital crazy board, so like an association chart. So you'll know, you'll see a face or a question mark of some people, and all the documents that mention them, or they participated in, so you can kind of get an idea of who the persons of interest are, with contact information as well. You're going to see the location of where the event happened, and you're also going to see a timeline. And it's very important because we get these documents at different, even though I'm getting them from like right now, I might get a document from 1952 today. Tomorrow I might get a document from 1971. I might even get a document from yesterday. So when you're posting those on social media and writing those stories in real time, it's appeared to be real time, or it's in the past. But the advantage of putting it in the timeline, then you can start to see the pattern, and you can start to see who's involved, and you can start to see where everything's located. So putting the documents out there is great, but it could be done so much better. And that's what I'm trying to bring to the table by showing people on how to take that information and that effort that you're doing and do it and make it matter, so you can come to the conclusion. So just as I was able to locate someone, in Florida from here, that requires building a case, and that requires looking at the information and figuring out what information could be traced and could be found, and to, in order to locate a suspect. In many cases, with this disclosure part, what I'm trying to do when I apply those skills is trying to figure out who is responsible, or who was in the room, who has the information. And if I look at the past, I start to see this pattern of who had the information, but then I can locate their family today. And when I find their family today and I'm able to get them to have a conversation with me, they tell me the stories from grandpa. So there's skills that are involved that a lot of people do not use in this game, because everyone is a researcher because they're trying to write a paper or write a book, or a journalist because they're trying to get fast clicks and likes, and put their flag on the moon, thinking they're super important because they broke a story talking about documents that were already released many years ago. In situations like that, and it's very challenging, but to the experiencers, to the audience that is listening to it, they don't know the difference. They just see it as ooh, and interesting.
Yeah.
And then that's where these messiahs start to come out, right? People start to worship these people because they did something, but what they're doing is not really that important, but the effort is there. That's where I'm trying to, also with the association, once this website is built, I'm hoping to, by showing the example, encourage these people, and the many that I'm not trying to talk bad about them as people. I mean, just the industry, just focusing on the industry culture. It's the way that it is. By encouraging them to do what they're already doing and contribute to this global site. So that way you can see American data beside Canadian data, and UK data beside UK data. I'm sorry, all of the data. And then you can start, and especially when you look at the proximity and you look at the timeline, you'll start to realize who was all present during the Cold War, when the Germans had their flying saucers. So as an example, 1952 document I have from the Royal Canadian Air Force and RCMP interrogation, talks about a German soldier who crossed the border to Canada because they didn't want to be subject to the United States interrogations, and confessed that he participated in creating one of the German flying saucers. And at that time, the Defense Research Board had enough understanding of how these flying saucers were created to write in the report that they believed that this German engineer was lying in order to get a green card. So within this report, there's enough data to show, like the evidence and the facts say that something existed in Germany. Germany had the technology to do so, and the Defense Research Board knew enough about it to say that this person who's giving this testimony in real time doesn't know enough information about what Germans really have. Now, what's interesting about that is when you compare that to American history, and you look at Operation Paperclip, we have what's called Operation Matchbook, which is the same thing. Canada got German engineers as well at the same time. We just called it Matchbook, not Paperclip. And we have Project Magnet is the equivalent to your Project Blue Book. And then there's also a cover-up story, which Project Theta or Project Second Story, which is similar to that whole debacle with the Condon Report in the American, in the States. So me understanding my own Canadian history, trying to communicate and convey that into the American history. Talking about it is one thing to be able to understand, because we were all together at the same war at that time before we were fighting with each other. We used to get along at some point. And but when the database is built and you start to see the timeline, the proximity, and the associations, and we compare American to Canadian data, I can almost guarantee you that Canada has the answers to solve some of the questions that you guys are fighting for in America, because your declassification process is so tight, whereas ours is so loose.
I agree.
Right. But yet there's also a lot of Canadians that are in this fight that do not report on Canadian cases. They're all piggybacking off the American. And whether or not that's just for reviews or for ratings, or they're at their end of life and they're just trying to sell the next book and retire, I don't know the reason for that. Or perhaps because with that service document, we do have an agreement that if anything happens in our airspace, is to provide this report handed over to the States so the States can carry over or continue. So perhaps their perspective, with the experience that they have, of course, being older and knowing more, tracking this longer than I have, that perhaps forcing them to answer at that end will get us Canadians answers on this end. But yet this is unexplored. And I feel like it's missing and being overlooked. And often, and when you talk about distractions, when they've already released the information, but yet no one's talking about it, which I think is also why the Canadian government and all the analysts that are in the Department of Defense that have been assisting me are encouraged to do so, because someone's finally taking interest. And it's not just writing a report about it; it's connecting the dots.
Yeah. Just to interrupt real quick, we are out of time, but I want to make sure.
Oh, wow.
I want to make sure people know how to get up to you. So, give your website again.
Yeah, so the best place to go, believe it or not, would be our YouTube channel,
Okay.
youtube.com/the Experiencers Support Association. All of our media content is there. My podcast is there. We have a new podcast that just started. It's called East of Astrology with Dave Petrella. And we have several things going on there. And if you go to the website, www.tessacan.org, everything is there. But also take a look at the About page, which you'll see other people that were involved. So there's Serena Draces, there's Cece as well. They're all assistants and helpers in this, in the paranormal consciousness spectrum as well. We have this thing called Experiencers Anonymous. It takes place on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a private Zoom link that you get to have a chat and talk about your experiences without being investigated or anything like that. Just a simple, a simple hangout that we do for experiencers weekly. So you can find that on the website. There's so many things that the association does. You will find me through the association. The work that I talked about today is on behalf of the association and the people, but there really is, I'm just the tip of the iceberg. There's a huge team that is responsible for me being here. So please follow them too.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed it, and it's been a little while since we've had a kind of a UFO kind of based show. You know, a lot of
Perfect.
folks hit paranormal and they automatically think ghosts and Bigfoot, but I like to incorporate everything. And I was really looking forward to this, and you did not disappoint.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And sorry about the hiccup.
Oh, no worries at all. You have a great night, sir.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And with that, the fire is out. So much information in there, so much stuff going on that he covers. I really enjoyed it. Thanks again, Ryan, for coming onto the show. If you are out there and you are involved in some social media, make sure you add me, add the show, Fireside Paranormal Hub on Facebook. We have Twitter, Fireside Parapod, Parapod. We also have our Instagram and TikTok. I'm having a lot of fun with TikTok, so if you're out there and you're a TikToker, make sure you follow me and check out some of the clips that we make. A lot of clips from the show, a lot of clips from one of my old shows, because you don't want to miss those. Make sure you check out our website, firesideparanormal.com. Check out the merch section. We got a lot of really fun stuff on there that you can pick and choose from. They've been doing some sales, so if you like paying less for really cool stuff, might be a place you want to check out. Also, if you wouldn't mind, if you listen on Apple Podcast or Spotify, if you give us a little rate and review, I'd really appreciate that because that helps the show out. And that is all the time we have this week. Until next week, everybody, don't be afraid, only believe.